those of you that just walked in, I do want to say we learned Friday late of Marcella's retirement, and I'd already sent out Friday notes, and it hit me when one of you looked surprised that it might have been a good idea for me to share that with you guys so that you're not caught off guard by conversation in the public. So one, I apologize for not telling you, and two, please know that we did receive that retirement letter on Friday, and so we'll be moving forward with making decisions about that in the near future and communicating that with the board. So the purpose of today's work session is to discuss a couple of priorities and to talk about how those fit into our priorities that are listed based on current funding available related to projects. So we're going to go right into it, but I want to say thank you for being here and thank you for engaging in the dialogue with us. So if you look at the agenda, you'll see that the first thing we'll do is talk a little bit about overall projects that we kind of put together for the board as we were working through the GEO bond process, and we pulled many of those from the feasibility study that we did a few years back with Fanning Howie. You can see that we'll then go into talking about Happy Hollow and the process that we're going to go through to get community input as well. And then you see the second priority we'll talk about, which is the ground floor, particularly a phase one to get that project going. WLCSC, Mrs. Ayler is here to speak a little bit about the Education Foundation and how, upon our request, the board and administration, they would be willing to engage in fundraising to help with projects. And then we'll go into a compare and contrast slide where we'll talk about the two projects that we'll be discussing and show different ways that we might tackle some or all of these priority projects. And then we'll end with questions. And I'd like to request that if you'd save your questions till the end, that we'll get all the information out. And that way we can truly engage back and forth in dialogue. And the board can also engage in dialogue among themselves too. So with that, we're going to get started. Mrs. Cronk, would you start off by talking about this slide with regard to projects and funding sources?
Yeah, sure. So this should look familiar from our GEO bond proceedings last summer and last fall. It's a list of our priority projects that will need to be addressed in the district, and we have ordered those in order of importance. And remember that we have more on this list than what we have available for in the GEO bond money that we have available. But this is just a reminder of those projects that we listed earlier in all of our proceedings.
You're all aware that Happy Hollow is certainly a lingering project. And it's been a lingering project for some time as the building was vacated when the West Lafayette Intermediate School new building was built. And we know that the building really was not in a position to house a school of students. We know too that maintenance and repair needs continue to escalate. You recently heard about the chiller and the issue that we have with the cost to temporarily fix it. And that is something that concerns us with regard to whether or not we would repair it because it's quite a bit of money for a situation where we don't know if it would last additional days, weeks, months, or a year. And we also know that to even get parts today, to have an opportunity to maintain the chiller temporarily, we were pretty fortunate to have that opportunity. But given the cost and given the uncertainty, we question whether or not now is the time to take a risk and put that kind of dollar amount into that chiller when we know that it's outlived, far outlived. We were told 3 years ago that it could die anytime and would not be able to be repaired. And so that, along with several other maintenance issues in that building, we know that we've come to a time, and we've probably extended that time, overextended, to where it's time to make some decisions about what portions of that building are demolished and what portions are maintained, as far as the old versus the newer portions. And then we know that the estimated project cost to demolish will do nothing but increase over time. So we are in a position where the board has requested a recommendation by December. We also know that it's important to gather community input as we not only recommend the phase of demolishing it, but also help the board understand stakeholder interest in future use. And when I say stakeholder, we mean school input as well as the greater community. And our intent is to survey and have some focus groups to discuss, to have a better understanding of a direction we might go long-term. And so I'd like for Mrs. Roth to talk a little bit about the process that we will go through with Skybound.
So you can see we have the timeline here. The first step in that is drafting survey questions and kind of getting an overall idea of what we would do moving forward. And that is where we currently are. Mr. Jones is working on that, and our team will provide feedback. And then once we've provided feedback, of course, that will go to the board as well for input before we release that survey to the public to gather more feedback and input. We anticipate in late July, August, somewhere in that arena, that survey would go out. Once we had that information back, we would be able to use that information to then have some focus groups, kind of narrow in on some ideas, and then that would lead us to our overall timeline to be able to synthesize all the information gathered from feedback from the board, from the focus groups, from different people participating in the survey, to be able to make a recommendation for that December mark.
Another lingering project or project that we've been faced with for some time now is the ground floor of the junior-senior high school. We know that during the major renovations, this was an area that didn't get touched. And so you'll hear some discussion that perhaps now's the time to start investing in updating those facilities. We've been working knowing that there's a lot to this ground floor project. We've worked with Fanning Howie. The board is aware. We've provided phases, potential phases in which we might tackle this one phase at a time. And we also want to discuss with you that first phase where we might address a locker room, boys and girls. You'll hear more about that from Mr. Strode and Mr. Rogers. And then there's also potential for the WLCSF to engage in some fundraising opportunities for us, which can help with future projects as well. And so we're going to have Mrs. Ayler speak to that. But I'd like to first, we'll kind of go back and forth. I'd like to have both Mr. Rogers and Mr. Strode speak a little bit to the project, and then we'll kind of go into the financing of possible potential financing. We'll hear from Mrs. Kronk, and then we'll kind of go back to Mr. Strode and Mr. Rogers again.
Okay, so as he mentioned, there we go. As he mentioned, this is the ground floor, the project overview. And when it says locker rooms, it's referring to the girls and boys PE locker rooms. We have a lot of locker rooms. So when we say that, just to let you know. So we're looking at renovating that space to modernize those facilities and improve our kids' experience and also enhance their safety down there. The focus on these spaces would be first the girls' locker room, and then the other part would be minimal disruption to the boys' locker room. And you'll see, again, a map here in just a minute that'll show that. The existing conditions currently, the girls' locker room, aging finishes, it's congested, and the outdated fixtures. And for the boys' locker room, it's mostly serviceable when we go through this phase one with these showers slated for temporary offline use during that construction area. And then again, the attached drawings that you'll see, the document shows the current footprint and then how we circulate through, and then the mechanical and electrical and plumbing constraints that we would maybe have to deal with.
Again, these are talking about what we currently call the junior high PE locker rooms. You'll see a couple slides later that will have a drawing of this. These are the locker rooms that are utilized by the most students throughout the school day. So a lot of kids in and out of those areas all year long. This would give us 2 fully independent locker rooms, each sized to accommodate current and projected school population. You know, it's going to reconfigure those spaces, making them more operational, more functional, most importantly, safer for the students during the school day. The phasing and impact, you take the boys' shower zone offline while renovating the girls' space. And then once the girls' space is completed, as funds would allow, would continue the renovation and finish the boys' PE locker room as well to, again, have two nice functional locker rooms for the students.
Mrs. Cronk, you want to speak to this slide, talking a little bit about budget and scope options?
Yeah, so we have different options, as I mentioned before. We have a limited amount of money, some different options that we can do with that money. So taking a look at the first option, option A, we could do a complete build out of both locker rooms, assuming that the estimations of Fanning Howie are correct, using only available funds, but this would limit the amount of money that we would have for other projects, unfortunately. Option B, we could complete the build out of both locker rooms. And one option that we could look at with option B is to take out debt with lease financing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, what that would look like, so that we could also complete other projects that are on that list as well. And then option C, third option, we could value engineer the build out of both the locker rooms, which Fanning Howie would design both locker rooms. We would assume the prices are higher using only the available funds, which would limit other projects that we would do as well. But Fanning Howie would design both locker room spaces, and depending upon the option, we could either do either the whole space or we could just do part of the space. But doing any work at that bottom floor would enhance student safety, privacy, and ADA compliance. We'd improve traffic flow and our functional adjacencies. I said it correctly this morning. I was having a little bit of issue this morning. As far as the location close to team room, storage, and laundry. And we would also have a future-proof design allowing for easy expansion and technology integration in that space. The next steps would be to finalize the schematic design and cost estimates, which, as you know, we've started those conversations with Fanning Howie. We would review the phasing plan with our stakeholders to confirm that we have operational continuity throughout any project that we would decide to do. And we would align on our preferred budget scenario, what we're talking about today, to proceed with the design development.
Mr. Strode, you want to speak to this slide?
Yeah, on the left side of that diagram, you see in red, it says the new scope of initial project. So what's kind of boxed in there in red, those are the two junior high PE locker rooms that we're discussing. The boys would be on the north side and then the girls would be on the south side there. You'll also notice kind of the entire ground floor project. It includes a wrestling room, weight room, various team locker rooms, training room, laundry. I mean, it's that whole entire area being revamped to really meet the needs of the students during the school day and also provide the necessary support for the extracurricular activities that utilize those spaces. But first, it'd be great to get the ball rolling and to do something in the locker room area, because I think that affects the most West Lafayette students throughout the school year. And again, that's just the phase that's boxed in red there.
Did I go the wrong direction? No. Yes, thank you. And so now, Mrs. Ayler, if you want to talk a little bit about how you might engage in fundraising through WLCSF efforts should the board and administration request that partnership with regard to the priority project.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Greiner. I would just want to clarify what the foundation's role would be in working with the school corporation to work on these projects. So the foundation exists to support school priorities. Right now, we currently work on raising funds for scholarships for graduating seniors, funding the backpack program for families who are food insecure, teacher grants to enhance classroom teaching and learning, capital projects and program spending through our Pillars initiative. We work to engage donors, and our goal is always to match donor interests with school priorities. A recent example of this would be the Bottomley Endowment, which is supporting mental health initiatives at the junior-senior high school. We are also working to grow the foundation's endowment so that My time can be more focused on programmatic fundraising versus keeping the lights on, if you will. The foundation's role in a capital campaign, we would be fundraising for priorities as determined by the administration and the school board. We do not set your priorities, but once your priorities are determined, we would work together to launch a capital campaign and set fundraising goals for that campaign. We would only do one capital campaign at a time. I'm one person with a part-time staff, so we want to make sure that what we commit to doing, we can do well. Capital campaign steps would look like beginning with completing a memorandum of understanding between the foundation and the school board and the school corporation. We would create a campaign strategy that includes facility naming opportunities that are consistent both with the foundation's priorities and with with the foundation's policies and the school board's policies. We would continue conversations with potential donors and look for lead gifts. As we take class reunion tours through the building and we go down there, they notice the need, and so we have begun talking about, we hope to one day be able to help the school redo this part of the building, and so there is some interest there that we're aware of. And we would continue to host donor events and site tours so that we can generate interest in helping with this project. Factors for campaign success, we would hope for a visible commitment to the project by the school corporation and the school board. And commitment would be money. If you help get this project started, then we would come alongside you and see how far we can take it and what we can do to complete all the needs that are down there. I think it would show that the school corporation has a vested interest in completing the project, and it would give us momentum as we start to look at who we could ask to join us in fundraising for that project. We would want to have consistent, organized campaign messaging so that we're all on the same page. And then we would look to develop naming opportunities for future phases of the project. I think the goal would be to work together with you all to enhance student experience by transforming that space so that it's modern and accessible, and it supports not only athletics, but student wellness programs that happen every day in the building.
Thank you, Mrs. Ayler. Mrs. Kronk spoke a little bit about the projects and to what level we would complete those projects, depending on the available funding. And so we have here a side-by-side compare and contrast with regard to the two priorities, and then how perhaps other priorities might fit in to the decision-making as well. So, Mrs. Roth, if you'd talk about this one, I'd appreciate it.
All right, so let's talk about the color first. You're going to get a glimpse of how my mind works, for better or for worse. So up at the top in blue, that is, you see a dollar amount. That is the GEO bond money that has already been committed in some way, shape, or form. You can see tennis courts. You drove past it today. We're in the process. Underneath that is the amount of GEO bond funding that remains. So those are our colors. Go over to the right-hand side. Green, you see Happy Hollow chiller, Happy Hollow partial demolition, and then the roofing portion of the high school over the LGI wing. That is, you can see a top priority. We've grouped that together in green to kind of show that there are some things that need to be done sooner as opposed to later. That purple, blue, whatever you want to call it, color, you can see those are other priorities. You also see a 2A and a 2B. That is an either or, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You'll see with option A and option B. The light yellow or cream and then the peach color, those are priorities that fall towards the end. So you can see each of those projects move over to option A, B, and C. Mrs. Kronk already talked about option A. The important thing about option A is it assumes that all the costs we currently have are correct, and it assumes that we can get everything done with the ground floor with option A if all costs are currently correct. You can see it includes both the girls' and the boys' locker rooms, as I said, and it assumes no other debt is incurred. Option B and C both assume that costs are higher than what we currently have estimated from the companies we've worked with. Option B also includes both boys and girls locker rooms. Option B, as Mrs. Kronk mentioned, does take advantage of lease financing to make up for higher costs And you'll see option B also gets more things done. So option B is the one that would have the least financing, but more of the projects would be done. And then option C, again, assumes higher cost. Option C was what we talked about or referred to as value engineering. So it assumes that the ground floor project is designed to fit the funds available. So basically, we go as far as we can with the funds that are available. Option C also assumes no other debt is incurred. The assumption underlying all of these options is that we already have available to us the approximately 1.8 million from the WLCSF through their gracious cooperation with the school and willingness to support the schools. And it also assumes no future donations. We know that the WLCSF has always worked hard to provide additional funding support, but we also know that that is not anything that we could guarantee in creating a project.
There, I can't read the remaining number, remaining funds number. What is that? It's too small for me.
$3,900,000.
Okay, that's what's up. under-
$3,900,300.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So one thing I want to point out here is, here's where over time we're going to need direction from the board. We can make any of these options work in the way that we've described that we can. Some things that interest us about option B is the uncertainty brought on by future revenue with regard to property taxes and the recent legislative changes that will impact tax rates too, as you're aware, but certainly also limit funds moving forward. And also, if we were to incur some debt through lease financing, minimal debt on Happy Hollow, we've discussed as a board and an administration concern of moving more quickly with Happy Hollow, because we've heard discussion of the possible change in legislation. That hasn't happened, but there's been dialogue of that in past sessions, which could bring our building back up to availability for a charter school. That is not something we see right now. And we know that our Happy Hollow has already been on the DOE list, and that expired, and there was not interest back several years ago to purchase the building. But it's something that is in the back of our minds always, because legislation has changed over time. And 2 years ago, we were especially watching closely, Mr. Reuter, Mrs. Cronk and I were watching language that was kind of starting to concern us, and that didn't come to fruition, and that wasn't discussed this session. But we know that it's time to move on Happy Hollow. And so if we were to look at option B, it does two things. It gives us some additional funding in a time of uncertainty, but it also provides some time where we know that building would not be susceptible to challenges due to legislative changes. With that, we are going to open it up to the board. We would love to engage in questions, and then of course we understand the board members will want to talk back and forth among themselves as well. So the next one simply says.
Regarding the Happy Hollow, I wonder whether we have talked to Purdue and West Lafayette City to see whether they can collaborate with us to contribute some fund for us, because they can, it's a part of the community and they can benefit from it as well.
So that is the point in working with Skybound, to truly survey and then engage in community dialogue. The thing that we want to make sure of is that we are focused on our students and supporting educational experiences within our schools. That would be our priority from a district and I would assume board perspective. But yes, we don't know what will come out of the study group focus sessions as well as the surveying that Skybound will do. We know that we got a lot of great feedback through their approach in helping us with the strategic plan. And I heard comments from both the board and our team of how they were impressed with that process. And that's why, even though this isn't to the degree of an overall strategic plan, it certainly is a way for us to collect additional information from the community, including Purdue as a partner. Thank you for that question, Dr. Yen.
Rachel?
Along the same lines, I'm a little bit concerned. I think when you talk about Skybound and the work they did on the strategic plan, it was pretty clear what the mission was, right? It's educating students. And everybody's, kind of, or most people who participated in that have some personal experience or awareness of what that means. I'm a little bit more concerned about the nature of the questionings, of the question regarding Happy Hollow, because I'm not sure that everybody in our community, or many in our community, or even in our schools, know what that building is currently used for. And I would like us to take more of a needs-based approach rather than a resource-based approach. So we know that there is a building. The question is, what would best serve our students? As you mentioned, what is needed by our students? What will take our schools to the next level and next place? I have a hard time justifying expenditure, just personally, because there's a building and we need to do something with it. And so I would like to see the questioning and nature of questioning be much more aligned with this is how it is used, what are the needs of the district and of the community, and how do we use that resource in the best way. So that piece is, I think, a little bit, it's great to ask questions, but what kinds of questions are you asking, and how does that help us understand priorities of the district?
We are in that phase at this time, so that's a great point, Mrs. Witt. And that is, if you'll look up there at step 1, draft survey questions, the same thing will be applied to those focus groups. And we have no doubt Mr. Jones will be able to engage in dialogue with the community to collect that input from their perspective, very similarly to how they did with the strategic plan. But it will be a very focused set of questions to do just what you're suggesting.
No, I'm glad to hear that. I just, as I kind of explained at the beginning, when he did the first round of questions for Skybound, everybody knew what the outcome was. The outcome was educating students. I'm not sure that everybody knows what the outcome is with regard to that building. So that's all I want to be clear about, is that those questions be focused in a way that is aligned with our priorities. If you just go ask people in Payless what they think we ought to do with that building, you're going to get 50 different ideas. And
I think we're saying the same thing. That's what I'm saying is step 1 is the process of doing that. So I don't think your concerns will go unnoted. And I think your concerns will be addressed as we work through that with Skybound.
Thank you. And I had one other question come up as you were talking. I noticed on the priority list, the different priorities with regard to facilities, and what I am not seeing on there is one that's come up multiple times, and that is the plan with the band and displacement that would happen with Happy Hollow. And I don't see band anywhere on this, anything that's up there. And I know that's been a conversation for at least 3 or 4 years. So I just would like to know where they fit in this plan.
They are a part of the dialogue that we've had initially with regard to Happy Hollow. They are a group that is a school group that is currently using that space. And so we've had ongoing dialogue with that. They've also had dialogue with the principal and with the athletic director with regard to use of a specific field. But as far as storage and things like that go, Happy Hollow is currently, they're a group that is being accommodated through Happy Hollow.
Yeah, and that would include all the robotics clubs and all the sports summer leagues as well, because I know that baseball in particular had auditions in that building. But can we go back to the slide where all the numbers were not that slide, but the other one where we talked to the GO money and the list of priorities?
Yes.
I just want to make sure the math I did in my head is right. So option B is 5.15 million. Option A and C are 3.9 million. But if we're talking about an assumption that costs are higher by 1 million, potentially, if option A assumes all costs are correct, the difference between costs being correct and the overrun is roughly option B. So why does option A only cover, roughly 2/3 of the list?
Would you like to speak to that, Mrs. Cronk?
Because the full list, I always forget the button. If we go back to that initial list, that whole list, there is more than what is available in the GO bond. So we've started a few things off of that list, and that's why there's the 3.9 million left. And if you look over here on the right, remember that the WLJSHS ground, there's two different options. So that would only leave us to be able to do one of those to get to that 3.9 million. And we're considering that we have the 1.8 from WLCSF that will go towards the bottom floor as well. That comes into play as well.
So that doesn't come into play in option A?
That assumes that we're using 1.8 to go towards that project, that bottom floor project. And then spending 3.9, including $1 million more to go towards the ground floor.
Well, you're CFO, so you're obviously better with numbers than I am, but I'm just trying to understand why, if there aren't any cost overruns in option A, why we don't at least have 2 or 3 more of those boxes checked. Not all of them, but 2 or 3 more if there are no cost overruns.
I believe we added all of these up and we were good when we went through. So if we look at Happy Hollow, so Happy Hollow is, yes, 1.5 plus 600,000, so 2.1. And then $600,000 for roofing. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. And then we have $500,000. So we would not be doing the air handler replacements. Would be $200,000 in upgrades. Oh, I can't add to 100.
But also, why are we making different base assumptions between A versus B and C? I mean, to me, it would make sense that if we're assuming that the costs are higher for B and C, like, why are we comparing? It's comparing apples to oranges to me.
And that does add up to 3.9 million. Those things that are not in black. So the Happy Hollow chiller, the partial demolition, the roofing replacement, the lighting upgrades, and the ground floor of $1 million adds up to 3.9 million. And that 1 million for the bottom floor would then be in addition to the 1.8 million to get the project complete.
I know it was confusing when I first looked at it, but the lower 2 purple items are either or.
Yes.
They don't both need to be done, so it's this or that. And that might be where we're getting hung up.
Right, but why are we assuming costs are correct for A and that they're higher for B and C? Like, what was the reason behind making those different? Because if we're comparing 3.9 to 3.9, it's not comparing the same thing. It's one is making assumptions that the other is not.
So when we did the estimates, that is without making assumptions, but it is estimates. And then when we've met with Fanning Howie, their dialogue is it really will depend on what actual numbers come in when we're bidding the projects and so forth. And if you want to speak further to that, Mrs. Cronk, to clarify anything that I've said. Good. I was okay on that statement.
And then
That's the comparison though.
Right.
Estimates versus actual numbers that come in.
But option A and option C are both estimates, correct?
Notice there is the plus sign with option C, so it may be more than the 3.9 million.
But that one's also assuming that the costs are 500,000 to $1 million more.
Yes. Which is
So
also the
it
reason
could-
why the locker room went from $1 million down to 700,000.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be able to do the whole locker room project in option C. We'd only be able to do as much as what money we would have available. So I think that's the biggest difference between those two options.
Wait, the biggest difference is that we're assuming that costs are gonna be $500,000
Higher,
to
too.
$1 million more on those, but it's not because of anything different that we're doing this.
Correct. It's that the
So-
cost would be higher, so we would be able to do less
So why aren't we assuming
with the
that-
bottom floor.
Right, but why aren't we assuming that for A as well?
Because we're assuming that we actually have the correct prices for option A, that everything is good, we can do
Okay.
that. But if there's prices that are higher, we'll have to value engineer that bottom floor.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense?
Getting the Aldi
Yeah,
version
but-
instead of the Whole Foods version of the bottom floor, right?
Right, but to me, it would make sense, we have option A1, A2, where we make the assumption that costs are correct versus not correct, and same with option C1 and C2, where we make the assumption, because if we go with option A and the costs are actually 500 to a million more, then we're doing even less than that.
Right. Correct, and we can run other options. These are just the three that we chose to show you today to look at. Yeah, there's 50 different options we could do. These are the three that we're bringing today.
Right,
So,
but
but-
I think the big difference is that we're making baseline assumptions between the different options
Yes.
in terms of estimates of cost, and I think we need to be comparing with the same assumptions.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason we wanted to give you kind of the side-by-side, because that first one, you're correct, is the only one that assumes the cost we currently have are the actual costs that we would incur. And so we realized that that probably wouldn't be likely, that cost would be higher. So then we wanted to offer some other alternatives, and then the alternative of also the lease financing. So yes, we could absolutely do option A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and move around what we assume in different directions.
And that would be presumptuous for us to put all that out, but under the board's direction, we can and will do that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like, what we're really looking at for option A, if our baseline assumption is that the actual costs align with what the assumptions we're making for B and C, then really option A is probably just the top three, and maybe I can't read the numbers; they're too small. But maybe one of the other two. So it's not that's not actually what A and C are actually very different options. And so I think that we just need to be working with the same assumptions across all of our models.
We'll just call A wishful thinking for now. Has there been any consideration about how much it would cost in both time and money and stress, to be honest, about a complete demolition of Happy Hollow? Because if the building is as bad as you say it is, why keep any of it?
So it's history, George, there are new sections to that. So the parts that need to be demolished are the two-story sections. The LGI room and some of the back part of the building is newer construction and it's actually quite still serviceable. So there was a desire to retain just that section of the building.
And that's what I'm getting at. I know those parts are new, but serviceable now is different than actually useful for whatever the site plan is going forward. So, I mean, if they could pick it up and move it or rearrange it, that'd be one thing, but if they can't, then has that been talked about at all?
What we've talked about initially is collecting the input and also recognizing that the Happy Hollow building is used by multiple groups. So we've made no assumptions of the community input at this time because we haven't collected it, but we have learned the importance of it for the various groups that are using it, as Mrs. Witt alluded to through our meetings. Mrs. Roth and I have met with the various athletic groups that are using it, the band, as well as robotics. And what we do know is that that building, that site is necessary. That gym is necessary. And from there, we're going to gain additional input. But I hope that answers your question. We have not talked about full demolition to date. It doesn't mean we wouldn't if the board had a vision of going down a specific direction, but from the conversations we've had and from the conversations we've had in the past with the board, there are portions of that building that are they're good uses. And so to demolish portions of the building that Mrs. Witt described and tuck away the remaining is a viable option, ensuring that we're optimizing the spaces necessary for our students and student athletic groups and extracurriculars and so forth.
Sure, I get that. I just want to make sure that all options are on the table, because even during a partial demolition, the building's not going to be usable for the groups that are in it anyway. So if there's an opportunity that presents itself to do something either spectacular with the site or to use it to fund some of this, I think those are things that we have to talk about.
The parts that are that are currently being planned for demolition, are those being used by certain groups? I'm not familiar with what's being used where, but you said the two-story parts, but are those actively being used by groups, or is it the other spaces that are being used?
Those parts that are the newer portions are being used. There are also portions of the two-story areas where we would demolish that are also being used. And there's where, if the direction after we collect all of the information and make a recommendation to the board, if we were going to demolish those two sections, there would need to be dialogue among administration to determine how and where we are housing and fitting everything in, because it would take some spaces that are being utilized today. And so there's where we would have to look at the footprint across the district and understand where every group would have a space to do their activities.
This is super helpful. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think this ground floor is a super high priority, and has been for a while. There's a great need, so I appreciate the information. And the foundation's willingness to help us fundraise for whatever projects we choose is helpful. My question at this point is the timing. So I feel like there's a lot of unknowns out there still in collecting data. So number one, Happy Hollow. And if I understand correctly, December, we'll know a little bit more the recommendation by administration of what the community wants us to do with Happy Hollow, so that we can determine what that project funding will or will not be. We recently have heard that transfer numbers and funding with that is a lot of unknowns. So that's going to have a big influence on funding. And then to me, it feels like this is the third kind of funding information. And so the question is, when is the timeline? Like, are we waiting, till we get transfer information, Happy Hollow information, and then we will decide with all of that and this, so we're talking maybe January, of which project we're going to be going with? Because if a lot of funding goes towards this, that does limit our hand with Happy Hollow, and we don't know enough there. So what is your thought process of when decisions, and also letting the foundation know? Because let's say there's some grand information we get with Happy Hollow and the community decides that's our highest priority, even over the ground floor, then I would guess the foundation, if they said they can only fundraise for one campaign, then that will be where the fundraising would go versus the locker room. We just don't have all the data yet to make any of those decisions. So what is your thought on timeline on making decisions for this?
Today was awareness and priorities, and hopeful that the board did find this information helpful. We are working through the process now of collecting the information with regard to Happy Hollow, as you suggested. We believe we will have that information, as you saw on the slide, a little earlier, so that the board can prioritize. But today, really, we'd like the board's input and guidance of additional information along the way as we proceed, as well as developing that timeline, because as you said, those are all puzzle pieces that are all going to fit together very closely.
So if I understand, the decision of working, what project the foundation's going to campaign for, and kind of A, B, or C option, or whatever we decide, all that will be determined once we've gotten all the Happy Hollow information as well? Is that what I'm understanding?
The vision of the foundation fundraising is more toward the ground floor, unless the board would direct us otherwise. The foundation believes they would be much more successful in raising money directly in that building where students are reporting every day. The board ultimately, as Mrs. Ayler discussed, would assist in setting a priority if that vision, the board required a change in our vision of where the foundation would raise dollars for us.
Okay, so the foundation would like to start fundraising for the ground floor. They think that's a better option than Happy Hollow, but we're not making a decision for spending for the ground floor until after we get all the information about Happy Hollow. Is that what I'm understanding?
I believe it would be important to fully understand the pieces of the puzzle. Would you agree with that, Mrs. Kronk?
I do, yes.
So the answer is yes to your
Perfect.
question.
That's very helpful. And then one little question just to help me understand. When we look at option A with the ground floor choosing the option to spend $1 million on it, it looks like, then we don't have the funding to do the air handler replacements. When we get over to option C and we say everything's going to cost more than we thought, so we have to take the project down to 700,000, why are we then saying we do have funding to pay for the air handler replacements? Like, why did that get put back in, if that makes sense?
We did discuss that. I think, and this could be incorrect, but I think we were, that value engineering, at that point, it really does become more bare bones. And then I think the idea was that the air handler would be something that we could accomplish at the same time. But again, it's the idea that that is the unknown of you're not sure what the excess cost is. And then with your value engineering things are kind of off the table.
And it really does boil, it's more of a conceptual way of thinking in the value engineering. These are not all the options that kind of goes back to where David was. This is not, or Dr. Perper was, this is not focusing on like set options. It is laying side by side the way it could turn out. Obviously in the middle, like when we were doing our projects in our previous district, we were value engineering constantly. We had, this is where we were going to be. But to ensure that we got each necessary priority project done, we were cutting things out along the way. And so that's where here there is no constant or definite. It depends on how things come in. And this is not, it's not to suggest these are true set options. So.
And that's helpful. I think for me personally, it would be helpful, and not today, but as we come forward, is understanding administrators' priority. Because if I understand correctly, if we have $1 million, it looks like we have an option, and I understand all this are estimates, to do the ground floor like we want to with the boys and girls locker room, or we do it a lot more basic and put in the air handlers. And I think what are the recommendation from administrators of which is the higher priority? If it's the same cost from our point of view, in some ways it'd be helpful to hear administrators say, I'd rather have the ground floor be what we want, we just won't do the air handlers, versus, okay, we'll do the bare bones because we do want the air handlers. And so from my perspective, I don't know if I feel strongly until I hear from administration's recommendation over time.
I think the important thing we're really trying to convey here is that we have a lot of decisions to make, and we feel like we need your help on some of those decisions because there's a lot of angst. We may be forced to do the air handler replacements at some point if we don't address them. So those, even with this list, there's still a lot of unknowns. And so I guess I'm not trying to ask you to understand where I'm coming from, but this is kind of where we are. And so we do have to make some decisions, and that's really just what we're trying to portray here, I think. Not that we are going to go necessarily one option or the other, just that we're in that position right now with a lot of things that we have to get done, and so decisions are going to have to be made. Does that make sense? Okay.
So I want to make sure, and Wendy might have something to say on this as well, but I want to be clear from the foundation standpoint, some things are easier to fundraise for than others. And so it's not that they wouldn't want to fundraise for air handlers, for example, if we said that was important, but air handlers are really perceived by potential donors as something we ought to be taking care of naturally in care of our facilities, where an upgrade that really sets us apart is a little bit easier to go, particularly to alumni and ask for help with. But along those lines, I think there was an important point made in there that we would, in order for the foundation to be successful, we have to also commit funds. We can't say, hey, great idea, foundation, go get her done, because that's not going to be effective. So for me, it's important to say we don't have to make, and I fully agree that we need to have a lot more pieces to the puzzle. Knowing some information that we've had coming through, I'm a little uneasy about incurring any additional debt at this point in time. That makes me a little bit, it gives me some pause. But in order to make the decision and allow the foundation to go ahead, we don't have to make a $3.9 million decision. We have to make a $1 million decision. So we don't necessarily have to decide everything that we're going to have to do. We have to decide if we want to give the foundation enough that they can work with it while we figure out the rest. So I agree. I like all the pieces and parts, and I really appreciate what was said about shifting priorities and getting all the pieces. But the foundation's turnaround in money is also going to be a little bit slower, right? Because they've got to collect over time, and people will make commitments and not necessarily hand over a check. And so it's just a little different fundraising model than going to the bank and taking out financing. So
You make a good point, and if the board directed us to proceed with the girls' locker room portion of the boys and girls' locker room, then the foundation, upon our request, would be able to move forward with their fundraising efforts with us. And then with that, obviously, you see that the A, B, and C, as Dr. Purpura mentioned, can be broken into new ways of value engineering with regard to where we go with Happy Hollow, based on the information that comes in, and to what level we demolish and prepare for future recommendations, as well as then if there's additional funding available going back into Part B of the boys and girls locker room and completing the boys locker room, depending on how all that funding unfolds. So these are all just options for the board to discuss, and for the board, as Mrs. Mumford suggested, to determine if you want to see that full picture before we move forward with any of them, or if you understand the challenges that we have with regard to funding and the multiple projects that we have, with regard to if you want to hold off and see how the study comes out and so forth.
If we were to just go ahead and do the partial demolition of Happy Hollow, does that change the cost of the chiller? Would that,
I can answer that.
yeah,
These were all estimations done at the time of the study about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And so these are still just estimations. We don't really know what that final cost of, so right now we have $2.1 million in there for Happy Hollow. That may be inclusive of getting the chiller for a new area. The cost may be more. We don't know until we actually start to address that project. But these were estimations on a very rough study about 2 years ago.
And if your question also was pointing to, would it address the chiller issue? It would address it in that we know that we need to replace the chiller. So right now, we wouldn't put a new chiller in. So we're kind of stuck on whether or not we put money into something that's broken and will still feel broken. And that every day we'll be kind of crossing our fingers that it continues to work. We will know that we're going to be focusing dollars toward a chiller that fits the portion of the building that remains. And I think that's possibly what you were getting to.
yeah, that was my question of if we were to move ahead with demolishing like
Right.
a portion of it, because we know that we have to demolish that, then does that reduce
It
does
should.
reduce by 500,000? And then
It should. That cost,
Okay.
that $600,000 cost was our quote that we got right after I got here, so about 2.5 years ago. We actually went out and did bids and everything, and the cost of that chiller was $600,000 for the whole building at that time. And so that's why we left the $600,000 in there. In addition, we have $1.5 million in there for demolition. About 2.1 in the rough estimation would demolish and tuck what is left. Okay.
because then I think it would be worth even considering the demolition or the partial demolition before we even complete the study, if we know that those parts of the building are not going to be usable, that might end up ultimately saving us some money. So it's something for us to think about as part of the process, and maybe not waiting until January on that part.
And this is why we wanted to present now, because we do need direction from the board, because we can't do everything, and we realize the board represents the community, and we realize it's time to start moving. So thank you, Dr. Pepper, for those points.
Based on all the information and also the input from the principals, sounds to me we should start to work on the ground floor and the boy-girls locker room before we even do the survey for the Happy Hollow, because the purple part, I feel very urgent and essential for the school operation. And as for the Happy Hollow, there are a lot of uncertainties. For example, the chiller, if we demolish the building, and what will we build? And then the chiller might be, depends on the plan for the Happy Hollow as well. So what kind of chiller do we buy? Do we install? I feel there are a lot of uncertainty. And we need a lot more money to take care of the Happy Hollow, which is not that urgent, but for our students. And we need the ground floor, we need a boy-girls locker room to be fixed. And I feel that part we don't even need a community input. And why don't we just go ahead, do that, and solicit funding to support that? I feel that can also connect to Rachel's point. I feel, people will be more willing to donate for that part rather than buying a chiller. Nobody will name after a chiller, so which will be broken in 15 years. So I feel, time-wise, I feel we can just work on the purple part and do survey for the green part. And another thing for the Happy Hollow plan, we talk about student education, and one idea I have been having in mind, I also heard from the community, is the possibility of having a lifelong learning center. So not only for the young kids, and we can have the Happy Hollow site to cover education from anywhere to babies to all the way to retirement people, and so they can come here to learn and to, a kind of a community center sort of feeling. Sure, we will have space for band, for robotics, and some other after-school activities for our students. We give them priority. However, at the same time, we can save some space for preschool, which we talk about. And also something like the career academy sort of feeling to re-educate people so they can have skills to join the workforce or career change, or for the retirement to retired people to enrich their life and hang out. And I feel that might be more attractive for the community, given that they invest a lot into our district, like referendum, all that. And I hope those people can also benefit directly from our district.
Thank you, Dr. Yen, for those points. And I think you make great points regarding setting the WLCSF up to begin the fundraising. I would suggest that we would be ready to start the initial phase of those locker rooms, for sure the girls portion. And then if there were money, depending on how far it went, finish that part B of the boys, or the WLCSF might begin raising funds for the boys portion of the locker room. But we would be prepared to move forward if the board were to determine that that was something we would do sooner rather than later.
Yeah, but speaking of priorities, one other thing, because it got ignored just now in the conversation, I also see on that priority 1 list a roof, and the very top priority in priority 2 is an air handler at the elementary school. Now, those affect the habitability of those buildings. So I don't know that we should even question that we should do those and do those as soon as you recommend.
The roof is definitely a non-negotiable. The, the air handlers, the discussion with Mr. Daly is that we have replaced some over the years, and the desire is to continue to get them all replaced at some point. So it's still a priority, but it's not as much as a priority as it used to be since we've done part of them already. So, but yeah, the roof is definitely, that's a non-negotiable. So, yeah.
David?
Well, I think that's the other thing is, what are the things that if we don't do right now are going to cost us a lot more money later on? I think that we need to discuss those. And I mean, with Happy Hollow, we actually don't have to go and build something new right now. We can do the demolition and then wait 5 years to see how, and I'm not arguing for that right now, but I think that is a legitimate option. And so we can see what are the bigger priorities on here that we need to address. I do have a couple more specific questions about some of the proposed things, like with the locker rooms. You had mentioned that it would fix safety issues and things like that. Can you explain what are the current safety issues? Because that might move things further up the list, depending on.
Mr. Strode and Mr. Rogers, if you want to speak to that, that'd be great.
You want to go back to slide 8 or 9, or the next one maybe?
Go to the picture.
The map.
Yeah, the map.
You're controlling it.
Map.
Forward, one more, right there. Yep.
Thank you.
First off, the locker rooms that we are proposing to begin with, I think they're relatively safe right now, you know, and our PE teachers are able to supervise students in there. For those who have taken a tour, if you go back to when the previous remodel was done, for example, they were like showers and a foot shower, and then you walked up the stairs to the old pool. So that there's kind of a space around the corner that it's not great. It no longer serves a purpose. That there's not an adequate number of bathroom stalls or working showers in there that are utilized. So, right, the reality is when kids are getting ready for a swim unit, you know, various restrooms on the ground floor are being utilized by kids to go in there and change and so on, because they clearly are not comfortable in the current space. In a later phase, what's up there in green, it's not green, it'd be just to the right of that. The space gets reconfigured a lot, but the current, what we would call the high school boys locker room, again, if you've been on a tour, you can really kind of appreciate what I'm saying. There's a lot of passages and rooms and doors and spaces, and that's a tough task to ask coaches and more importantly, the teachers during the school day to be able to supervise all those students and student athletes. The girls' locker room, the high school girls' locker room, it's not on here, but it'd be on the bottom right, kind of what would become a weight room. It actually is a nicer space. It's newer and it's set up okay, but the current high school boys' locker room I don't think is a great setup.
I think you made a good point too, Dr. Perper, about the fact that what we prioritize with Happy Hollow doesn't have to be the end product. The end product is the overall recommendation based on what we collect from the community. What we do know is that there are portions of that building that the board and architects decided were not fit for moving forward. And those we need to address sooner than later, as you suggest, or it becomes an eyesore, 2, safety issues in itself, and 3, do we replace the current building with chillers that will address the entire building, or do we put a Band-Aid on it for a day, a week, or a year? And then if we don't address that and we don't demolish part of it, are we going to have mold issues across the building? Those are things, we've got fans going right now throughout the building. Those are things that we're going to need to decide as we determine the priority of Happy Hollow. So Happy Hollow is a top priority from my perspective and from Mrs. Cronk's perspective of, at bare minimum, addressing those portions of the building that were deemed by the board and administration of previous and architects unfit.
Have the two of you had a tour of this area yet?
I've been down there, but I haven't had a tour, so I'm familiar with the
Yeah,
space.
the locker rooms. Okay, Daisha, did you get one? I did. You did, okay. Would the two of you like to arrange that with the admin team to be able to see what we're talking about? I think that makes it a lot easier. Probably should make sure that it's not in use, but but the summer is a good time for that. The other thing I wanted to ask before everyone disperses is, have we dreamed big at all with this in terms of, we have WLCSF, which is a great resource that's able to raise money for us. And we, as I understand, we have some cash reserves and money left over from other projects. Has there been any, in a perfect world, if we had unlimited funding, we could do, or we would love to see this? Because I think with the robotics, for example, there's a lot of parent involvement, there's a lot of community involvement in terms of sponsorships. And I think if we were to say, we'd like to build a special, purpose-built area in the Happy Hollow site for robotics, I bet that's something that could be fundraised for, just knowing how much the parents are involved and how successful they've been. And I'm sure there are other areas with sports that would have similar parental and alumni buy-in and would be similarly attractive in terms of fundraising. Nobody wants to fundraise for a chiller, like we said, or to knock something down. But if those things were part of building something really great, have any of those discussions happened, or should we have those discussions? Is that crazy?
One, you made a lot of really good points there, so I'll take part of the ones I think that deal with us.
Okay.
And I think Dr. Yin said it really well. No one really wants to put their name on a chiller.
Right.
I don't think anybody wants to put their name on locker rooms. And so, one, this gets us started. At my previous district, we did an entire overhaul as well. And it touched not only every student that took PE, but it touched then our athletes. And then it raises our standard that's where it needs to be for West Lafayette for the visitors that come in. So this is not something that I would say is something we're really proud of, is that ground floor with all the athletes that come in. So I think she can speak more about the ability to fundraise in certain areas. So I think the Dreaming Big is really a part of that. It's, help me out, was it 3 phases that maybe was the ground floor? 4 phases, thank you. The other comment about the robotics is kind of separate from me personally. But I will say this, when we were talking about Happy Hollow, pretty much every athletic team is using that to some degree, minus a few. Robotics is huge. We even had, I didn't know this, we have fencing that's in there, we have band that's in there. So when we're talking about a lot of our 1,200 students, it's a lot of it that is in Happy Hollow as well. So I want to turn it over to you a little bit and talk about phase one.
Before that, I do want to address the bigger question of the Dream Big overall. Your Dream Big is the 4 phases, which the board's been aware of through the mapping in previous Friday notes and so forth. So there's your overall Dream Big. It's completing all of the ground floor. It's a great question. And then the Dream Big for Happy Hollow is going to come through community input and so forth. The necessity is getting the portions torn down that Dr. Purpura discussed earlier, getting them torn down if we're going to keep part of the building, because as Mr. Rogers said, there are school groups that are using that extracurricular. And we need that space. In fact, we would probably be tight space once we tore things down to address Mrs. Witt's concern, and that's where administration would be working very closely with each group to make sure that we're utilizing every space to the level that every group gets the respectful attention that it needs. The Dream Big here, because we are not in a position to incur the debt that that was incurred through the lease financing a few years ago. These are things that, as you're aware, are lingering projects. And the Dream Big, as the board discussed with me when setting the goal to address Happy Hollow, that comes later, because I would hope that that might be really big dreaming. But it is essential that we maximize space of what we preserve from Happy Hollow, and it's very important that we don't just leave a vacant building there to continue to fall apart among the public. And so that is a high priority from our perspective. The Dream Big comes later. It may come way later, but that's why I think it's really important to understand community input and all stakeholder input and all the groups that are utilizing the space today. So that Dream Big comes as we collect information. It does not put a halt on the fact that we need to do something quickly with regard to those spaces that are falling apart. And then I would love to hear Mrs. Ayler speak to how she can help with the big dream. But that big dream right there, there's been input of coaches, there's been input from Mr. Strode, there's been input from the previous principal, and a lot of thought has gone into what those spaces might look like. Did I sum that part up, Mr. Strode, correctly? Okay.
I love to dream big, and I think this project is really exciting and has already generated some excitement among alumni who were athletes, who were influenced by coaches, not just as a student, but took lifelong lessons with them and are now looking to give back to their school community. So I think we've got a great opportunity to do something really wonderful in this space. If the Dream Big turns, a couple of years from now to Happy Hollow and what that could look like, fundraising to demolish a building, I think would be not an option. Nobody's gonna, that'd be really a hard sell. But I do think what would come after that would be something that would get a lot of community excitement and generate a lot of community support to do something great in that space when the time comes, when you all determine the order of how you might do things. The other thing I want to think about is if there is some short-term, smaller projects that need to happen to keep these groups going with purpose-built spaces, as you mentioned. I think we'd have, and we're doing a first floor project, I think we'd have to really be thoughtful with each other and how we do that we're not over tapping our community to ask for their support. It's the reason why, as a foundation, we don't generally do a lot of the dine out nights and the car washes and the things, because I know there's a place for those within our school community. So trying to see us as one that can help you with the larger projects and not the smaller, but still being respectful of each other, that we might be asking the same people to help with certain projects. So I'm happy to dream big with you all, and I just want to be thoughtful about how we do it and what we're asking people to help us do, that we're, like I talked about earlier, consistent messaging, that we're all on the same page and working to do what is best going to meet our students' and educators' needs.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I think we had previously talked about doing the first phase, then sets us up nicely to fundraise for the other phases. And the locker room is probably a really nice piece for that. Do we have like a time, are the locker rooms something that could be finished in a summer? Or are we looking at 6 months to a year? Because if it's a summer, then we'd probably be looking to do them next summer. But if it's more, then we need to avoid certain.
We've had initial conversation. Mrs. Cronk, you want to speak to our initial dialogue with Fanning Howie?
Yeah, I believe we were in the timeline that they set down with us on. The project would start in the summer. It would not be done by the time school started, so there would be some sort of overlap. Locker rooms are very, very labor intensive with the mechanical and the plumbing and everything, and so that would take longer than a couple of months to complete. I think, in my experience with projects like this, it would start over the summer and probably finish up towards the end of the calendar year, would be my guess. But we wouldn't know until we get the full design actually done on how long that would actually take.
Okay, so would we consider, I'm thinking about locker rooms connected to the gym, priority use is basketball and volleyball typically, because those are the indoor sports that connect directly off of them. There's opportunities to figure out different things for the outdoor sports. Would we consider then moving that up earlier to like right after basketball season or something like that, so that would finish before end of calendar year? Because if so, then that timing is a factor in our decision-making process.
The locker rooms we're talking about here are primarily used by PE students during the school day. So very few athletic teams are in there, maybe junior high volleyball, junior high basketball, and we would have to make short-term, plans for them in the early fall. But the idea was, right, the demo part of the project is going to be loud, messy, noisy, so that would start in the summer. And then the finishing of the product during the school year would be less invasive.
Yeah, and at this point, we would be very limited when it could start anyhow, because they haven't actually done the full design at this point, so that would have to be completed. Then you'd have to go through a project hearing and other things before you could actually get started, and then the bid process. And so we would be limited at this time that it would have to start in the summer. And then we've had a lot of other conversations about needs of athletics and such during those time periods, so, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, this may be something that you're saying is a very high priority basic needs. Like it felt like the track, tennis courts, the football lighting, we weren't waiting to get more data about Happy Hollow. We were saying, this needs to get started, let's just go. So if I'm understanding from this conversation, this may be where we're at with the locker rooms, is no matter what we hear from the community, this is a super high priority. So if that is true, my question is part of that same timing. If we're thinking we want to start in the summer, if we wait till January, till we have all data and just pick all our projects at the same time, can we start in the summer? Do we need to bring this to the August or September meeting and get it approved so that it can, like, what's the latest that it can get approved so that it could start in the summer if the administration's saying this is super important?
Do we need to have a July meeting? I mean, yeah, I would think.
The timeline would allow us to take it to the August board meeting.
So so I think for me, it'd be really helpful is for the administration to be able to share, and it can be in the August, that this seems to be like, no matter what we want to do with Happy Hollow, this is a need in our school, and we want to get moving before we even get more data. And if we start in August, we can do it in the summer. If we wait till January, it's going to be another full year. And I think, to me personally, that would be helpful in understanding the decision.
I think we can do that. One key, though, is I want to say this along with Happy Hollow demolition. Those are top priorities. So I think we would bring to you getting it started, and then hoping that the funds were there to finish both the boys and the girls, allowing then WLCSC to begin their piece. But we know we need to address Happy Hollow too. Not just understand the dream big. That comes later, and we knew that. But we know that for over 4 years now, or even beginning the phase of building a new school, that building was going to have to be dealt with to some degree. And so I think both of those priorities are very important for us to look at our funding available and determine, yes, we think it's a priority to get started on the ground floor, and we would love to bring that in August. To what level of completion of that, with or without the WLCSC help, would be the question.
So if I understand correctly, I'm looking at those numbers, we do have the funding to pay for both those things. We
Okay.
can do demolition and start the basic locker rooms.
They will, so let's focus on the bottom floor for just a second. They will design what's in that red dashed line. How much funding we have depends upon how much of that we can complete. Our initial thoughts last month, where we were going to bring to you the architect agreement to design that whole space, but we would probably only have enough money with current funds of what we have from WLCSC to do the girls' locker room. And so that's kind of the question we need to answer. What part are we going to start with? Is really, if we're going to start with ground floor, we need to make that decision. What are we going to start with?
But
We don't have enough money to probably do that entire dash
Red
section.
area.
We will design that entire dash section because it all needs to be designed at the same time to flow properly. But we probably can only do part of that as a project.
Now, do I understand correctly, before we make our decision about the Happy Hollow demolition, part of that may relate to the information we collect from the survey, so we can't make that decision until January.
Correct.
So can we approve them to start moving forward as much as possible? I mean, it feels like we can't totally commit to this one till we know what the demolition costs in January. So is there really an option, I guess, if we approve something in August, can we approve it so they can get moving, but we don't commit too far with the
Yes.
funding till we get
Yes.
all the facts in January?
In August, you would be approving the architect agreement to design that area. And then
they
we
would make
wouldn't do bids until, and we could do a lot of alternates to
Right.
see exactly how much we could get done. And those bids would come in the winter after we would do a project hearing, probably late fall.
And that approach allows us to also keep the priority of Happy Hollow. And so then we can work with the funds we have to get Happy Hollow addressed and to address starting the ground floor.
Could save you a lot of money on demo. We'll put up a sign that says Rage Room and just let people have at it. Go ahead, Dave.
I know some guys in Kokomo
You
that
could
like to
raise
tear
money
stuff
to do
apart.
that.
That's the best part. It's fun.
I actually don't think that we have to wait until January to make a decision on at least a partial. There's no way that we are able to keep that part of the building. Is that correct?
I don't think we need to wait as long as we don't come across as presumptuous, because we do want community input. But I don't see us, unless we're going to put a new air handler in and we're going to keep putting Band-Aids on broken parts of a building that have not been given attention for multiple years. I don't see us waiting much longer on Happy Hollow.
And I
the
don't see us getting
demolition portion.
25 million somewhere to do the entire building renovation, so.
Right. So like, we're not renovating that entire building. Portions of it will be demolished one way or the other. The question is, are we just going to demolish it, the part of it, and maintain the other part and then add on doing something? Or are we going to demolish all of it and build something new, or just demolish all of it, or just demolish part of it and not do anything?
And
So
so-
that part's going to
yeah.
be demolished one way or the other.
Yes.
And so the question that I guess I would have that would be worth finding out is it going to cost us the same amount to demolish and then or do the partial demolition now, and then like demolish the later part or the other part later if we do end up demolishing that part, or is it going to cost us more to do that in parts?
I can see that Mrs. Cronk wants to speak to that, so I want her to do that for us. But I think you make good points there. But I do want to state that if we were going to demolish it all, we would have to demolish it all with the understanding we were building something sooner than later because of the fact. Yeah, okay.
Typically, if you have to mobilize more than once, it is going to cost more in the end than just doing it all at one time, because it involves heavy equipment, bringing that on site, so on and so forth, escalation of costs and things like that. So if we were to demolish part and then come back and do it later, that would cost more than just doing all the demolition at one point. So the options that we have with Happy Hollow, as you know, we worked with Performance Services in the past to do that study, and they did that free of charge for us. So what we could do is we could put together an RFP to look at it's basically an energy savings project, because you would be demolishing part of it, or a guaranteed savings project, because you're going to save money by demolishing part of it. So we could move forward with looking at what that RFP would look like. And that would then bring back what the kind of those costs would look like, to demolish different sections and to tuck it all in, and we could get more exact numbers with that.
And can we also get the list of what extracurriculars, athletics, and other things would be affected by the demolition of the parts that we plan to demolish? Like, and are there alternative options for those programs?
We can absolutely include that in Friday notes too. We've already, like I said, throughout second semester, Mrs. Roth and I were meeting with each one of those groups to understand our immediate school needs. So we can put that together. And then we won't know exactly which groups might be displaced once parts of the building are demolished, but we can give you an understanding that some could be, and that we would need to work with the administration to figure out where those groups might go.
Looks like everybody's done.
I feel like we have some direction, so thank you.
We are very excited about that. Yes, we really want to get moving on both of these projects, and this is helpful that we have your permission to move forward and put together some things for the board.
Thanks for all the information. This has been really helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, we're